During this week, we are asked to remember in as much detail as we can the path of Jesus as being a path not only for him, but for all the children of God. The week begins with the palms, a sign of triumph, of prosperity, and also of immortality, used at the time of major processions in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus, including when he entered into the city. Yet this triumph then reverses as we pass through Holy Week, and we remember the trials that Jesus confronted. Trials from the two most powerful authorities of his time that he had dared to resist. He faced up to the authority of the high priest in the temple, as well as to the representative of the Roman Empire, and told them they were both wrong. That the way in which worship was being conducted in the temple was not according to the will of God. He spoke prophetically, and in the way of a prophet, he showed what his authorities were. He said, when he was in the temple, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it into a den of thieves," directly quoting the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, in order to say that it was wrong for worship in the temple to be entirely controlled by the high priest, who had established vendors of animals inside the large exterior court of the temple. In response to that, Jesus had reacted by assembling his own followers and seeing to it that those animals and their vendors were driven out. There could not have been a more direct threat to the authority of the high priest than to see the prophet from Galilee saying, "I know better how worship should be conducted here." But Jesus knew the prophecy not only of Isaiah and Jeremiah, but also of the prophet Zechariah. Zechariah in particular looked for a moment in time when not only the children of Israel, but the children of all nations would be included in the temple's worship. And he said at that time there would be no merchant in the temple. Jesus was enacting a prophecy. And he was enacting a prophecy on our behalf. When I say our, I mean the majority of us who have no claim on being the children of Israel, who belong to those many nations who were to be included in worship according to Jesus' prophecy. We can understand readily enough why the high priest would see his own authority directly contradicted. But Jesus also posed a threat to the Roman prefect, to Pilate, who was the one who actually had him put to death by crucifixion. Pilate saw in Jesus someone who was upsetting the arrangement in the temple, according to which not only was the God of Israel worshipped, but Rome was honored. Because Rome, during this period, had a direct investment, an actual investment in worship in the temple. The Roman emperor paid for sacrifice in the temple. The understanding was that the Roman emperor paid for the sacrifice. When you offered his sacrifice, you would be praying on his behalf. The Romans, with their wonderful pragmatic skill, had made the temple into an emblem of their power. as well as Israel's worship. Jesus was insisting that that status quo was not as important as establishing the prophetic principle that worship was to be for all nations, not only for those who were privileged. Jesus' path during the course of this week unfolds because of his direct contradiction of those two major powers of his time. But he also shows us something about the nature of prophecy in every time, as we can see from today's first reading from the book of Isaiah. Prophecy is not there in order to play the crowd. Prophecy is not there in order to pander to the interests of a given elite constituency. It is there to interpret the will of God and to bear the consequences that come from that. If you look at the pattern of the prophets as a whole, you will see that interpreting the will of God is far more important than any other consideration. Certainly more important than the popular association with prophecy and prediction. Prediction is a rather minor dimension of prophecy compared to announcing what the will of God is. More than being a matter of an oracle for what's about to happen, prophecy is characterized by the marks of its honesty, of its willingness to say where its authority comes from its insistence upon justice, in the case of Jesus, against the idea of an elite control of worship, and finally, for its passionate commitment to compassion, to see to it that the unlikely people, such as us, are precisely the ones who are included within the will of God. This path of prophecy for us is important this week, not only for what it shows us about Jesus, but also for what it shows us about ourselves. Because we are encouraged through the entire period of Lent, and especially during this Holy Week, to understand how it is that within our lives, what we are, what we do, what we say, interprets the will of God to others in a way that shares in the honesty and the justice and the compassion of the prophets. Now to God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, be ascribed as is most justly due, all might, majesty, dominion, and power, this day and forevermore.